Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 007, and we're talking to Karen Larsen about emotional eating and yoga. I'm very happy to be talking to Dr. Karen Larsen. Dr. Larsen is a licensed psychologist in Miami, Florida, USA, and also a registered yoga teacher. Her specialties as a therapist are in binge eating, emotional eating, and health medical psychology. In her yoga teaching, Karen concentrates on yoga that is suitable for every body shape, size, and ability, and works to destigmatize yoga for larger bodies. And I love this. Her ultimate goal, whether in psychology or yoga, is to support the client in turning inward, helping them move towards befriending their body and listening to themselves more and others less. I think all of us could work on befriending our body. I think that's a beautiful statement. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be a part of this.
Oh, great. So, Karen, you're changing the face of yoga with your work. So tell us what made you decide to blend Western-style psychology with the Eastern traditions of yoga.
Yeah, that has been a bit of a work in progress because for many years, those were kind of two separate parts of my life. Yoga was my own self-care and not really something that I envisioned incorporating into my work as a psychologist. So it's really been through a lot of, just different experiences that I've come across, whether it's been trainings in psychology or my own training as a yoga teacher, that I really started to integrate this idea more and more and more. And it's still continuing, I think, and evolving.
Okay. Is there anything that really surprised you with the blend of those two?
Yeah, I think in my training as a psychologist, there's a lot of talk of boundaries and kind of a maybe typical setting or a typical way to see a session. And so this idea of incorporating the body in a more physical way and acknowledging it and maybe incorporating movement into session seems at first really a little almost bizarre to me, just given my, initial training in psychology. It was, sit in two chairs or a couch and a chair. And so this idea of moving or really becoming more present with our body in a physical way was out of the norm. So that surprised me and surprised me in a way where I was like, "Oh, but I want to do that." And are other people doing that? And how does that look? And so it was exciting when I realized that I can kind of expand my horizons in a way that I didn't think or assume.
Oh, okay. All right. And are other people doing this that you're aware of?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Are people doing this that you're aware of?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I think it's a growing part of the psychology field. And then I think there's also, it's kind of coming from two directions. I think that there are yoga teachers who are becoming more educated and going into what they call yoga therapy, which is, not really the side I guess I came from. I came more from becoming a clinician first, and then learning about how I can incorporate that into my work. And so, but I think it's, it's kind of a meeting in the middle that's really very cool and exciting.
Oh, that's great. I'm really, I really want to talk about your work to destigmatize yoga for larger bodies. I think I've seen that kind of starting in the yoga community about, yes, that larger bodies are able to do and are get lots of benefits from yoga. So what's your take on that, and what have you been doing to kind of further that along?
Yeah. So, one of my specialties as a psychologist is working with eating disorders. And I worked at a women's treatment center. And during my course of being there, I had the honor of really being a part of opening a binge eating disorder program. And although not everyone with binge eating disorder is in a larger body, many of the women that we worked with were. And so that was kind of I think the avenue that really opened my eyes to, I want to make yoga accessible and inviting and interesting and not scary and intimidating. And so once I kind of had that mission for this program, I kept it. And even though I'm now in private practice and no longer with the treatment center, really just found it very empowering to not let society kind of dictate what we can or cannot do. And really found that to be an important message in so many ways, but really just an empowering counter message to a lot of the stuff that's out there in media and things of that nature.
Oh, I can't agree more. I think that's just excellent because although there has to be, I teach over 50s, and so although there has to be modifications, there's lots of benefits for them, but you don't really see those kind of bodies in the advertising or in the way that people talk about yoga. And I think that's really, really very sad because I don't think there's hardly anybody that can't get some kind of benefit from yoga. And yeah. Okay, so tell me, what's special about your yoga students?
Ooh, what's special about them? I think that they come in not wanting to do yoga. That there has been some coercion, most likely from people in their lives, whether that's from their therapist or the treatment center that they may be at. I still have a working relationship with the treatment center that I used to work with, so they may be recommending it. But I tend to work with clients who are very skeptical and unsure that this will be something that they will be interested in or can do.
Boy, that's a tough place to start. Where I'm impressed. I think that would be a very tough student to work with.
Right. But I will say, they ultimately have the choice. They don't have to meet with me. And so if they're willing to take that first step and at least have one session, I try to be really down to earth and fun. And I think that that's one of the ways in which it maybe kind of changes their assumptions about yoga.
And do you think that their assumptions about yoga are one of the things that's really keeping them from wanting to try it?
Sometimes, not always. I also do have a number of people who maybe had done yoga previously at another point in their life, and they feel like they can't do yoga like they used to do yoga, and so they assume that it's no longer accessible to them because they're not feeling the same way in their body that they used to feel. And so sometimes it's that, and sometimes yoga is very new to them, and so they are, kind of coming in with all these preconceived notions.
Okay. Yeah. So what does your yoga classes or sessions provide your students that's not easily available anywhere else?
One of the things that I do, particularly the first couple of sessions, is work incredibly slowly, showing lots of different modifications for poses. And I want my students to engage in those and feel the difference. Like, how does this version of down dog feel against the wall versus down dog on the floor? And really try to tune as much as possible inward into how it physically feels on their wrists, on their ankles, just different parts of their bodies, and for them to make decisions about what makes sense for them. Like, maybe I need to start with down dog against a wall rather than down on the floor, and permission to do that. So we move really slowly through poses just to give a variety of modifications and options, and for them to do what, as my teacher, Anna Guest Jelly, would say, yogi's choice. So really giving them permission to make the choice of how they want to do the pose, given, a certain number of options.
Okay, excellent. That's a great tip, because that really pushes them into their body, doesn't it? I mean, they really have to think about, well, how does that feel in this area and that area?
Yeah.
And I would say that's really, really valuable. I may do that myself. Thank you.
Yeah, that's how we learn, is from each other, right?
That's right. I really like that. Okay, so when do you feel most successful as a yoga teacher?
Typically two different moments. At the end of Shavasana, when the client is like, "Ah, yes."
Yes.
That's always rewarding. That's always rewarding. And then when they want to book another session and continue the journey.
Yes. That's excellent. I was talking to someone, and it's like when they use something at home, that you've taught them in class, and they come back. And those are wonderful moments also, that you think, oh yeah, I made a difference there.
Definitely. Yeah, that they were listening and that they really took that idea.
Yeah, it's great. So you say that you mostly work one-on-one with people. Is that, how do you describe that as being different from having a typical, shall we call it, class of multiple people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it really allows me to tailor the session to the individual, and again, really do a variety of modifications and not worry that someone is getting bored while I'm, offering different ideas to someone else. So it just, I think, gives me permission to take it slow as well, and really take my time and think through what makes sense for this person. And yeah, so I think that it's just timing and not having to juggle so many balls.
Yeah. I can understand that, because I teach classes with not a lot of people, but you are kind of pushed to keep things going, shall we say?
Yeah, even with 2 or 3, there's still kind of a management of making sure everybody's getting attended to.
Yeah. That sounds good, actually. I like that. So this idea of larger bodies, or curvy yogis, or whatever we want to say, which I think curvy yogis is a lovely term, is kind of I think, new idea. Perhaps I'm in Australia, even though I am from the U.S. So it may have been in the U.S. for quite some time, and I may have been unaware of it. But I think it's fairly new to say that these are valid students also. And how do you think that's come about, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think that there's been a real need, because at least my experience is that there's a large group of the population that have been avoiding public classes because of this kind of idea of everyone that does yoga is quite thin and flexible, basically.
Right.
And so I think that multiple people have really been the leaders in putting out these other brands, if you want to call them, but these labels that are more inviting and more connecting to some of those groups of people that haven't felt welcome or assume they're not welcome. I think sometimes it's an assumption and sometimes it's a reality, depending on the studio and the group of people that are there at any given point. So yeah, I think that it's growing, and it's interesting. I haven't thought about kind of when did this start to blossom really here in the U.S. But that's an interesting idea. I want to now do a little research and try to figure that out.
Okay.
But it's been going on at least for a good number of years, at least 5 or 6 years, I would say, if not more.
Because I've just become aware of it, I would say, in the past year. But like I said, I don't live there anymore, so I'm not an expert on that by any means.
Yeah.
So you kind of got into this through binge eating, emotional eating therapy. Do you still work with those people with those issues and bring them into your own yoga classes? Or because you said there was sometimes some rather great that there had been some coercion as to how they got there, but
Yeah.
but I was just wondering if how those two things go together, the yoga and the emotional eating aspect.
That's a great question. Yes. So the vast majority of my individual clients are seeking support from other professionals with emotional eating or binge eating. And so that it's kind of like because I was affiliated with the treatment center, I kind of have a bit of a reputation in that community for offering yoga for that group of people. So that has been kind of how referrals have gotten to me. But so one of the ways in which many people are coached and kind of taught as far as their relationship with food is a model called intuitive eating. And intuitive eating is about no deprivation. It's about really, if we listen to our bodies, we can start to pick up our own personal cues of hunger and fullness, and even what sounds good to us and what will give us satiety and satisfaction in our food, and that it's really an internal process. And so, as you can imagine, that pairs very well with the idea of yoga and really listening to our body and listening to what asanas feel good versus, what pushes to an edge versus what is not okay with our body and what is kind of too far. So a lot of that regulation of emotion and food also goes with our regulation of movement and what feels good and what's joyful and what is calming and soothing. And so all of those pieces I feel like fit together really, really well because I feel like the more someone can become attuned to their body's cues, it's only going to serve them in the emotional eating piece, in the emotion regulation aspect of life, as well as, how do I want to move my body today? What sounds good to me? What is my body craving, in a sense?
Oh, fascinating. I mean, the way you explain it, it really does make a lot of sense, and it does seem to really fit together very well. Mm-hmm. But I never would have put it together like that. That's just, see, it's just wonderful. I love that. where do you see yourself going with this? Or are there goals that you have in the future that you'd like to explore in this area?
Yeah, well, even though I was talking so much about doing one-on-one yoga, eventually in a few months, I'm actually going to move to a different office space that will have a group room. And so I'm envisioning maybe doing some groups with yoga, and maybe even some combinations, more combining therapy and yoga. So way back in the day when I was still training as a graduate student, I had done a yoga therapy group that was really just based on stress management. So I wasn't the yoga instructor. I was just the clinician in the group. And then there was a separate yoga instructor. And so she would do the physical aspect of the practice, but I would kind of facilitate a check-in and a check-out at the end of the group, so that group members could kind of tell how their emotions and how their physical experiences had changed over time, or over the course of an hour and a half. And so, so, kind of playing with some ideas like that, ideas that I've, experienced way back in the day, plus maybe some new things. So, yeah.
Okay.
We'll have to see.
Well, it sounds exciting. It really does.
Yeah, thanks.
Is there anything that you would like to talk about that I haven't covered, or that something we've said has made you think of?
That's a good question. I guess one of the things that I definitely want to make sure that your listeners hear about is just, as you had mentioned, this idea of doing yoga in a larger body being kind of newer and not as promoted or not seen as much in the media. That there are definitely some social media accounts out there that really exemplify the vast array of yoga that can be done in different body types. And so just really wanting to encourage people that if they want to explore that idea more and want some inspiration for that there's some great people out there on social media. Diane Bondi is one of them. Anna Guest Jelly, who was my yoga teacher, is one of them. But there's many more that I'm suddenly blanking on. But yeah, I think, once you find one of them, you can kind of meander your way through social media and run into a bunch more.
True. And there are, because I have a couple that I follow also, because it is important to me that we expand the view of yoga. Like you said, young, white, flexible, blonde, white, young and flexible, which doesn't include my group, my students. So yeah, I would really, really encourage people to, if this is an area of interest of yours, to look on Facebook, social media. I think you can find some good resources there. So, and if you would like to talk to Karen, her website is Dr. Karen, and that's Karin, Larsen, all one word, .com. I'll do that again, drkarenlarsen.com. Instagram is Dr. Karen Larsen, and the Facebook page, you're very good at this, Dr. Karen Larsen. You got your brand down. That's very good. And her email is karen@drkarenlarsen.com. So if you get it once, you're in. You got it. That's great. So anybody that might want to talk to Karen individually in the United States, in Florida, I'm afraid, then please contact her. Karen, I've just really enjoyed this. I've really learned a lot. I really enjoy the idea of yoga and getting into your body and what it can do to start you accepting your body. And although I wouldn't, certainly could lose a few pounds here, but just to accept your body, I think is hard for a lot of people. And I think that's a wonderful goal of yours, that people just accept their body and give it all the love that it needs.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I agree that it's a hard message, one that's not actually out there a lot. But if we can have more acceptance, then we can have more, I think, life, because it'll take up less space in our head.
Very true. Very true. I agree with that entirely, because it can take up a lot of space. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you willing to, we've had a little trouble getting together on this one, to come on the show and share your expertise. And I'm sure people listening have really learned a lot. I know I have. Thank you so much for that wonderful interview. Now for the listeners. To be part of Changing the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies, please take a picture of yourself doing your favorite yoga pose and email it to ctfoy@yogalikeness, all one word, .com.au. That is ctfoy@yogalikeness.com.au with your first or full name. I will upload it to the Instagram folder, Changing the Face of Yoga. So we will have an album of the spectrum of students who represent the face of yoga. Please download and review this podcast and tell your friends who might be interested. Thank you, and let's get together next week.